Hello, my Biblio darlings, and welcome to Bibliothesia. In case we haven't met before, my name is Mally, and thank you so much for coming back. It's always wonderful to see you. What Bibliothesia is about is I bring stories to life through my reading them. And the story that we're going to be reading today is called Mr. Nosey. But before we read the story, let's remind our bodies that our bodies are relaxed and safe for right here and now. And we're going to do that through a 4-4-8 deep breathing exercise, and I'm going to share some really funny knock-knock jokes with you. So let's start off with doing the deep breathing exercise. And how it works is we're going to breathe and inhale deeply for 4 counts. We're going to hold the breath for 4 counts, and then we're going to exhale out our breath like we're blowing out wind or candles for 8 counts. So let's start. Pretend you have a balloon inside your tummy, and as we're going to inhale, we're going to make that pretend balloon bigger. So inhale deeply for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's hold the breath for and now let's exhale out for 8. Oh, that deep breathing exercise always makes me feel so much calmer. And what also helps my body to relax is hearing some jokes. So I'm going to read to you some knock-knock jokes, and I'm just bringing over my knock-knock books, my knock-knock joke books. So here is the first joke. Knock, knock. Who's there? Nut. Nut who? Not so fast. Where do you think you're going? Not so fast, like not so fast. Okay, so here is our next knock-knock joke. Knock, knock. Who's there? Huff. Huff who? Have you heard the news? I'm running for president. Huff, you heard the news? Have you heard the news? Okay. I'm hoping you're feeling more relaxed and calmer. And let's read the story Mr. Nosey. And it's written by a person by the name of Roger Hargreaves. What I notice is there's a figure on the cover who's in a really dark green. That figure has a long nose. So that's what I notice. So let's find out more about what life is like for Mr. Nosey. Mr. Nosey liked to know about everything that was going on. He was always poking his nose into other people's business. Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if they came upon a locked door, couldn't resist looking through the keyhole to see why the door had been locked. And if you look at the picture, you can see Mr. Nosey's eye, and he's looking through a keyhole. Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if he found an unopened letter he addressed to somebody else, would simply have to open it to find out what was inside. Oh my, it looks like Mr. Nosey has a letter in front of him to Mr. Brown. 15 or 16 High Street, Tiddletown. Tiddletown. I love that name. Where do you live? Tiddletown. Okay, back to the story. Sorry, I just love that name, Tiddletown. Let's say that 5 times. Tiddletown, 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 Tiddletown. That's so great. Well, Mr. Nosey was the kind of person who, if he was sitting reading his paper on a train, would much rather read the paper of the person sitting next to him. Naturally, as you can imagine, Mr. Nosey was not very popular. People did not like the way in which Mr. Nosey would peek and pry into their affairs or their life. They did not like it at all, but did that stop Mr. Nosey from peeking and prying? It did not. Nope. Mr. Nosey lives in a place called Tiddletown. Okay, I have to get it out of my system. Tiddletown, 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 Tiddletown. Okay. Oh, I don't know why, but that word just cracks me up. Okay. Well, one day the people of Tiddletown, I'll refrain, I'll not say it 5 times, decided that Mr. Nosey was becoming much too nosy, and so they held a meeting to discuss what to do about him. "We must find some way to stop him from being so nosy," said old Mr. Chips, the town carpenter. And that looks like Mr. Chips. "That's right," said Mrs. Washer, who ran the Tiddletown laundry. "He needs to be taught a lesson." Oh, I wonder what they're going to do. "If only we could think of a way to stop him poking his nose into everything," said Mr. Brush, the painter. And then a small smile spread over his face. "Listen," he said, now grinning, "I have a plan." All his friends gathered round to listen to his plan. I wonder what Mr. Brush's plan is. The following morning, Mr. Nosey was out walking along High Street in Tiddletown when he heard somebody whistling behind one of the closed doors. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and tiptoeing up to the door, he quietly opened it and peeped inside. Splash went a very wet paint brush right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose, covering it with bright red paint. Look at Mr. Nosey's nose. The end is covered with red paint, and it's dripping down. "Oh dear, I am sorry," said Mr. Brush, who was painting the inside of the door. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go straight home to try to remove the red paint, which was very difficult and rather painful. Mr. Brush chuckled to himself. The plan had begun. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking past the laundry when he heard somebody laughing on the other side of the wall. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and standing on tiptoe, he looked over the wall. Snap went a clothespin right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. "Oh dear, I'm sorry," said Mrs. Washer, who was hanging up clothes on a washing line on the other side of the wall. Poor Mr. Nosey removed the clothespin and went off down the street, feeling extremely sorry for himself and for his poor red nose. Mrs. Washer chuckled to herself. The plan was working. The next day, Mr. Nosey was going past a fence when he heard hammering. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and creeping very quietly to the end of the fence, he peeped around. Bang! Went a hammer right on the end of Mr. Nosey's nose. "Oh dear, I am sorry," said old Mr. Chips, who was nailing up a loose plank in the fence. Poor Mr. Nosey had to go home immediately and bandage his poor red sore nose. Mr. Chips grinned a broad grin. Broad means wide. The plan was working very well indeed. The following day, Mr. Nosey was walking in the woods when he heard somebody sawing wood. "I wonder what's going on here," he thought to himself, and he crept up behind a tree. He was just about to peer out from behind the tree when it suddenly occurred to him that if he did, something very nasty might happen to his nose, and so he went on his way without being nosy. Sounds like Mr. Nosey may have learned a lesson. Behind the tree with saw raised in his hand, stood Mr. Hurd the farmer. When he saw that Mr. Nosey had gone on his way without being nosy, he laughed and laughed and laughed. The plan had worked. Mr. Hurd, hurried into Tiddletown to tell everybody. The plan really had worked, because after that, Mr. Nosey stopped being nosy and soon became very good friends with everybody in Tiddletown. That is the end of the story, except to say that if you're ever tempted to be as nosy as Mr. Nosey used to be, you'd better expect one thing: a sore nose. What did you think of that story? Have you ever been nosy? Have other people been nosy into your life, and what was that like? I thought that story was neat, and it was interesting how Mr. Nosey's friends decided, well, let's do something about it, so Mr. Nosey isn't nosy, and then we can actually work on being friends. So with that, let's do our deep breathing exercise as a way of wrapping up our time today. And then I'll share some jokes with you. So we're going to do the same deep breathing exercise we did when we started. Are you ready? So let's inhale deeply for 1, 2, 3, 4. And now let's hold the breath for Now let's exhale out for 8. Doing those deep breathing exercises always makes me feel calm inside. What about you? Now here's a challenge for you, or put a different way, is I'm going to invite you to do the deep breathing exercise right after you wake up in the morning, at lunchtime, and just before bedtime. And also when you and I meet. The whole purpose of that is to remind our body that we are safe right here and right now. And another way that our bodies know that it's safe is when we have good belly laughs. So I'm going to read to you 3 more knock-knock jokes. And here's the first one. Knock, knock. Who's there? Norway. Norway who? Norway, will we win without your help? Look at it, Norway. No way will we win without your help. Okay, here's the next knock-knock joke. Knock, knock. Who's there? Muffin. Muffin who? Muffin the matter with me. How about you? Oh, that's a takeoff on nothing is the matter with me. And here's our final joke. Pardon me. Knock, knock. Who's there? Elise. Oh, pardon me. Elise who? Elise, I didn't break my other arm too. Oh, at least I didn't break my other arm too. Well, I'm hoping that you found all those jokes funny, and either you're laughing at the jokes or laughing at me trying to figure out the jokes. And doing the deep breathing exercises, that you'll take up the invitation and do it at home as well. Just after you wake up and at lunchtime and just before you go to sleep. And we got to share a story today. So as always, it's been so wonderful spending time with you. Now remember to click the subscribe button and the notification bell to get notification when there's new stories so we can spend more time together. Well, until next time, bye!